Hello everyone and welcome back to my Magic the Gathering Commander Deck List Reviews. So this is a series where I go through either my own personal decks or those submitted by users and break them down to their core mechanics. I'll talk about the commander, highlight the game plan of the deck, give my critiques and wrap it all up with my feedback at the end. If you want to get your decks powered up and reviewed by me, make sure to check out the top link in the description below. But besides that, let's get into it. This week we're looking at Teval the Balanced Scale, which is a really cool precon commander from the new Tarkir Dragonstorm precons. I like a lot of the precon commanders. I think they're really fun, both of them too, whether it be the face commander or the alternate commander. I think they have some really interesting mechanics, some really cool stuff. So instead of being a Dragon Tribal commander like a lot of them are, this is sort of a graveyard lands matter deck. It's actually been pretty fun to build. I've had a lot of cool synergy pieces added in here, a lot of fun stuff. It sort of reminds me of the Necrobloom deck that I made. I'll leave, of course, a link to the entire playlist of all my deck list reviews down in the description below if you want to check those out. But it's very similar in the way that we're making tokens, we're playing stuff from the graveyard, and we do care about landfall triggers. So Taval himself here, it's a Spirit Dragon, of course, a flying 4/4, and he says whenever he attacks, mill 3 cards, then you may return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. But the biggest thing here is whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, you create a 2/2 black zombie druid creature token. So there's a lot of ways you can use that. One of the more prevalent ways to do it, especially if you look at the precon, there are some precon cards in here, but like Delve, where you can exile to help cast spells or that sort of thing, or you reanimate stuff. Anything that makes stuff leave your graveyard generates these tokens. So you have a lot of those effects in here. And so we got those two major game plans. One of the easiest cards to get out of a graveyard are lands. Not only does the commander also give us lands back, and Sultai has a lot of really good land stuff. It's just an easy way to get his trigger, and then we can use the zombies for a lot of different things as well. But you could go way more tokens with this. You could go way more on the delve thing. There's a lot of ways to make this. This only reminds me a lot of times as like a Tasigur deck, that sort of thing. I think even the other main set Teval also cares about delve, which is pretty cool. But yeah, this is more of an interesting reanimator combo sort of deck. There are two separate combos I'll talk about later as well, specifically sort of infinite combos that kind of power up this deck. And of course, because we're running infinite combos, this deck is at bracket 3. I think we're only running one game changer, which is Glacial Chasm, which is a card people may not even want to run in bracket 3. It's just kind of a salty game changer, which is why it's a game changer. Preventing all combat damage is usually kind of a combat lock for you, but it's such a good card, and we're a lands matter deck. We're running Field of the Dead and a lot of good stuff in here. So that's definitely something that we're building around, of course. But that's totally something that's optional. You could technically run this as a bracket 2 deck, but I think the power level more fits into bracket 3. So first up here, we've got our board wipes. Of course, we got Living Death, very, very good for any reanimator package, because a lot of times it can be one-sided. Very awesome. And Toxic Deluge, this is one I just run in pretty much any black deck. It's just extremely good. If you're not running stuff like Cyclonic Rift and you just kind of want a good sort of cheap budget board wipe in terms of, just board wipes in general, we've got a really good one here. It's only 3 mana and you can pay X life and all creatures get -X till end of turn. Just deals with a lot of threats for even 5 life. You're killing most things on the board, and it's undercosted compared to a lot of other board wipes. So not a whole lot in terms of board wipes here. We have some removal and that sort of thing, but we don't need too much with what we're trying to do. In terms of card advantage, so card advantage with graveyard decks is a little bit different than other engines, because you're using the graveyard so much that, milling cards and just having cards go to the graveyard can also count as sort of a second hand with the graveyard, because you're able to play a lot of cards out of it. So these cards strictly, put cards into our hand by casting them, which is why they're in this category, but that doesn't mean these are only cards that give us, technical card advantage. So first up, we got Dig Through Time. It's a delve card, which is awesome for a commander. It's an 8 mana spell, but you can pay 6 of it with the delve. It says, look at the top 7 cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand and the rest at the bottom of your library. So kind of just generically good. Most of the time you're wanting to cast this for 2 mana, getting 2 cards. A pretty good rate, especially because you can pick what cards you're getting. Just kind of generically good spell. I would run this on a lot of blue decks anyway, especially if you just put cards in the graveyard. If you're a cantrip deck where stuff just kind of hits the graveyard at all, you're running this in there just because it's easy to cast and easy to reduce the mana cost of. But in this deck, it's even better because we get to trigger our commander. Frantic Search is the one I also add into a lot of decks, but it's especially good in this deck for a number of reasons. Firstly, being that you're drawing cards and discarding cards, sort of a faithless looting type effect. But why I really like this card in most decks is the fact that it untaps lands. So as long as you have 3 mana, it's very easy with cards like these that untap lands, or that pay for themselves, like a rewind type of thing. Is you can double spell a lot easier during that turn. Cast your Frantic Search, sort of sculpt your hand a little bit. You can untap the lands and you can usually cast 1 or 2 extra things on that same turn. But because we are discarding cards, we're filling our graveyard as well as looking at new cards. That's kind of the extra value there. And then, of course, there are some lands in here that, we're fetching or whatever, they enter tapped, we can untap them. So there's also, that untap effect can matter a little bit more as well. Grizzly Salvage is really cool. So it's an instant that says reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You can put a creature or land card from among them into your hand, put the rest in your graveyard. So again, this is not technically a card draw. You do get a card back in your hand, but it's putting cards into your graveyard, so it's more of that mill effect, which is why it'll also be in the mill category later. River Kelpie is really cool. It says whenever this or another permanent enters the battlefield from a graveyard, you draw a card, and then whenever a player casts a spell from a graveyard, draw a card. So this is one that, you reanimate, or, you just get out on your turn. It's got to persist, which doesn't really matter. We don't care too much about the creature dying, but it will come back if someone tries to kill it once with any sort of destroy removal spell, or maybe board wipe, that sort of thing. Well, because, we have a lot of stuff leaving our graveyard, and it says any permanent. So when we play lands from our graveyard, we're drawing cards from it, which is really nice, sort of a landfall trigger there. And speaking of, we got Tatiova, Benthic Druid. So this is, of course, if you're running Simic Lands Matter, you're probably going to be running Tatiova. It's just landfall. Whenever a land enters, you gain 1 life and draw a card. So very easy draw engine there. Gigrog Monster, so this is actually our big combo piece, and I'll talk about the combos a little bit later. But of course, whenever 1 or more lands are put into your graveyard from anywhere, you draw a card. And that's sort of the card advantage there. If you're, sacrificing a fetch land, you get to draw off that and then also get your land, which is really nice. Treasure Cruise is our other delve card. This one's kind of more straightforward. It's just an 8 mana spell, so is delvable, and you just draw 3 cards. Sort of reminiscent of Ancestral Recall is kind of the thing here, and a lot of times can be good as that because we are filling up our graveyard so fast that we can really get that down to, even 2-3 mana isn't too bad for a draw 3 spell. And Windfall, so you could definitely run a lot more of these effects in here that are wheel effects where we draw and discard or discard draw. But Windfall, I was just kind of, put it in here to put it in here. It's very good because we do, again, want to put stuff onto our graveyard, so it's very nice there. And a lot of times, this is best played when someone else has more cards in hand than you because you are getting straight up card advantage where you're getting more cards than you're using with this. But just in general, being able to put more cards in our graveyard is honestly the biggest aspect of this, though it can refill your hand a lot of times as well. It's just one of those that, you put in blue decks because it's very good. So our 2 main combos for the deck are the Gitrog combo, of course, and then a Gravecaller combo. So the more difficult, kind of weird ones, it's a very well-known combo, is the Gitrog Monster combo. So he himself says whenever 1 more lands are put into graveyard from anywhere, which is very important, you draw a card. So the big thing with that is we have these 2 cards that have Dredge. So Dredge is an ability that just says if you draw a card, you may still mill whatever the Dredge cost is, and then return the card with Dredge to your hand. So with Dakmor Salvage, you mill 2 because it's got Dredge 2, and then Life from the Loam is Dredge 3. So they work a little bit differently. The best one here is Dakmor Salvage because it itself is a land, but Life from the Loam can hit stuff. So what we're kind of trying to do with this is you get a card like Psychic Frog that says discard a card to do something. It just has the activated ability of discarding a card. So with the Gitrog Monster, let's say you have to have Psychic Frog and Gitrog on the battlefield, and then you discard Life from the Loam or have Life from the Loam in the graveyard. The better combo here is with Dakmor Salvage, where if you can discard Dakmor Salvage, it is a land hitting the graveyard. And so Gitrog Monster would trigger to draw a card. Instead of drawing the card, you mill 2, return Dakmor Salvage to your hand. Again, you discard it with Psychic Frog's ability. It goes back to the graveyard. It triggers a draw. Instead, you mill it. And so you can kind of just keep doing that forever. You just get to mill your whole deck out. And there's a lot of cards in the deck that even if you don't have a bunch of mana up, you can usually win from there. There's a lot of different things. And just having a bunch of cards in your graveyard is very good. And it's when you can kind of do however many times you want. It's not like, oh, I have to mill the entire deck to be able to get this combo off. It's just something you can kind of go through. Life from the Loam sort of works similarly. But the way you need Life from the Loam to work is you need to have some sort of trigger. Let's say you have to have Loam in the graveyard, and then you have Gitrog and Psychic Frog on the battlefield. And let's say you crack a fetch land. That fetch land will trigger get Rog monster, so you need a separate land for this. And then you dredge Life from the Loam, and what you have to hit with this combo is you have to hit off of the 3 another land so that you can get the trigger to draw a card. Before you draw, discard Life from the Loam from your hand. So it's not as reliable, but just in general, Life from the Loam is a very good card for the deck because you can return lands from graveyard to your hand, which is very nice. And of course, Dredge is nice as well because it works really well with our commander. So if you are, milling a bunch of cards with the Get Rog Monster combo, it's actually pretty good to do on like someone's end step. So you can get a bunch of triggers if you have Teval on the battlefield, get a bunch of zombies and kind of swing with those because cards are leaving your graveyard when you dredge them. Life from the Loam just in general is good for our game plan because it gives us lands back that we can play from our hand if we can't play them from the graveyard. And not just with the dredge, but with the return trigger off of its resolution also gives us an extra zombie. So it's a little bit finicky with that. Really, the safe way to do it is with everything, but having the land because it itself is the thing that triggers Get Rog. But I added Life from the Loam here because it can sort of give you a combo if you're not trying to do like the full thing, but just get a little bit of extra value out of the card. Another very well-known one here is Gravecrawler combo. So Gravecrawler is a really busted little card that's 1 mana, 1 black mana, and says you may cast this card from your graveyard as long as you control a zombie. So, we're not in a zombie tribal deck, I would say. That is definitely one way you can make the deck if you wanted to. There's a lot of ways to do that. But of course, when we're doing this, or just in general with our game plan, we're probably going to have a zombie on our battlefield because our commander makes 2/2 black zombie druid creature token. So we just need one of those on the battlefield. I think there might be 1 or 2 other zombies in the deck just in general, but mostly get one of those tokens out. And then as long as you have that, you have Phyrexian Altar where you can sacrifice a creature to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Have these both on the battlefield or Gravecrawler in your graveyard and be able to cast it. You basically sacrifice Gravecrawler for a black. As long as you control a zombie, you can just cast it again from your graveyard, and you can do that over and over and over again. By itself, this combo just kind of works if you just have a zombie out, being able to cast him from the graveyard. If you have death triggers or leaves triggers or whatever, there's a lot of things. You're doing a lot of things infinitely with that, but you get some sort of payoff, and thankfully we do have that in the command zone. Because Gravecrawler is leaving the graveyard, because of course we're casting him, he does generate infinite Black Druid creature token. So that is sort of the, it's not a 2-card combo. You definitely need the commander, and Phyrexian Altar is not the easiest card to get out in this deck. We're more of a reanimator deck. It's a little bit more difficult to get artifacts from the graveyard back out. But if you do happen upon it, or if you're like, okay, run a few extra tutors to be able to get this combo more, easily, more efficiently, you definitely could sort of go into that plan a little bit more. But I just kind of added this in here because it was kind of good for what we're doing. And, there are other times when Gravecrawler can be nice to have as sack fodder for the deck. And in terms of graveyard recursion, we have quite a lot. So this also includes just in general recursion, not only like reanimation type effects, but return cards to our hand effects, or just play lands from graveyard effects. It's just kind of all the stuff that deals with the graveyard. So you have a lot of these like Aftermath Analyst. So this is one of the better ones in the deck. It says pay 4, sacrifice it, return all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So there's a few things in the deck that'll do that. That's a really big one there. Ancient Green Warden has the ability to allow us to play lands from the graveyard, and lands entering double ETB triggers, which is very nice as well for landfall, that sort of thing. Oral Procession is one of my new favorite cards from the new set. It's just a Tarkir main set card. It's literally just a regrowth. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand, but it's instant speed. It does cost Simic instead of just Grain, so it goes in less decks. It's a little harder to cast, but it's worth it. Just having the instant speed ability is very nice. Also, Grave Reaver is one of the new ones from the Commander deck that I thought was really awesome. It says whenever more creatures are put into your graveyard, you may put one of them onto the battlefield. So let's say, we have some effects in here that allow us to tutor cards to the graveyard, like Entomb and that sort of thing. You put it into the graveyard, and then once it hits the graveyard, you can immediately put it on the battlefield. So it's just a free reanimate. He is, an 8-mana card, but we have a lot of ways like straight up reanimate in the deck that allow us to just kind of get him back, or, Victimize is another way where we can choose 2 target creatures in our graveyard, sack a creature, like a Gravecrawler or something, and return the creatures from our graveyard to the battlefield. So you kind of trade 2 for 1. Kind of nice with that. Dread Return is another one. I love Dread Return. I put this in a whole bunch of decks. It's a 4-mana reanimation spell that just says return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. But the big thing is it's got flashback sack 3 creatures, which is huge because, of course, we're making a bunch of creatures with our commander. So it's a free reanimation outlet. You just have to sack creatures rather than pay mana, which I really love. It's really awesome. And it's nice to have the flashback just in general, because if we mill this into our graveyard, it's not as bad, and a lot of times it's even better just to cast from graveyard by itself because, it's free. It's easier to sack the creatures than pay the mana. Let's just do double spell and that sort of thing. So that's kind of nice there. But I do like Colossal Graveyard because it also triggers off of mill stuff. So if we mill creature cards off of, whatever we're doing, we can also just happen to get creatures back as well. And we are running, quite a lot of creatures. I think close to 30 creatures in the deck. Conduit Worlds, this is kind of just baby Crucible Worlds, but I like actually this better than Crucible of Worlds in the deck, not only because it's a lot cheaper than Crucible of Worlds, allows you to play the lands from your graveyard, but it also has a tap ability that says choose target non-land permanent card in your graveyard. If you haven't cast a spell this turn, you may cast that card. If you do, you can't cast any more spells this turn. So this is kind of just, if you don't have anything else to do, it's kind of a panic button where you're like, okay, I'm going to cast something from my graveyard, non-land permanent, which is really cool. So, it's like, okay, I'm going to cast, my Ancient Greed Warden or recast Aftermath Analyst if I really wanted to. And you can activate its ability too, if you wanted. There might be some sort of a loop there at some point, or, something you can just recur over and over again, every turn. But that's kind of just an extra cool little thing that works really well for the deck. Of course, because we're casting from graveyard, we get more triggers, and there's a lot of synergy going on. Eternal Witness, of course, is also very nice, just returning stuff from my graveyard. I like this card and these type of cards specifically. Because like I said earlier, it's hard to get cards like Phyrexian Altar or Instants and Sorceries back into our hand, because we're more focused on lands and reanimation. But this is a way to sort of circumvent that. We're like, okay, I'm going to reanimate Eternal Witness to get back, my Life from the Loam. I guess not Life from the Loam, but something like my Victimizer, my Reanimate, to kind of skirt that, where you can kind of go through the steps, still maintaining that reanimation plan, but being able to get, non-permanent cards back out as well. Codis is one of the secondary commanders for the same commander deck that Taval's from. He says, once during each of your turns, you may cast a creature spell from your graveyard by exiling 3 other cards from your graveyard in addition to paying its other costs. So it's kind of just an escape, which is really cool. Allows you to play creatures from your graveyard. And then whenever one or more creatures you control enters, if one or more of them entered from a graveyard or cast from a graveyard, you put 2 counters on him. So when you're doing that using his ability, he counters on him, and he's kind of cool because he's kind of a twofold ability. He works really well with Teval. Because not only does the exiling cards from the graveyard trigger Taval, but also just casting the creature and having that leave is a separate trigger that will trigger him as well. So you're getting the reanimated target, and then you're getting counters on Codis, and then Taval will give you 2 tokens because it's 2 separate instances of cards leaving the battlefield. And that is something I'm kind of limited with this card, which I think is very much necessary. It says whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard. So, if you are digging through time 6 cards, you're still only getting 1 Druid. So for this deck, you really want to make sure you're getting individual instances of doing this over and over again, rather than trying to, the mass stuff can be nice. Like our mass, return all lands from the graveyard to the battlefield can be nice for landfall stuff, but it's not super huge for triggering Taval's ability specifically. And of course, Living Death. So the big thing with Living Death is it not only makes everyone sacrifice all their creatures, or technically exile. It's kind of a weird one, and I've had to explain this a lot of times because, in essence, what it does is it switches the creatures on the battlefield with the creatures in the graveyard. But the way it does it is kind of weird. Each player exiles all creatures from their graveyard, then sacrifices all creatures they control, then put all cards exiled this way onto the battlefield. So it does basically do that. The only difference is you're exiling graveyards, so triggers from that or whatever. Sacrifice, so even if they have protection or indestructible, it gets around that, which is nice for a board wipe like this, and then everything comes back. So the best time to use this card is when, for one, opponents will have a bunch of stuff in their graveyard, so they're not getting a whole bunch of stuff back. It's usually best when you're kind of down on your luck, and in the situation where you would normally use a board wipe where you don't have a lot of board presence, so getting rid of your board doesn't matter too much, and when your opponents have a lot to lose, like a normal board wipe, but it's a lot more so when you have a whole bunch of stuff in your graveyard that you can bring back and sort of just switch and kind of turn the tides. This card has definitely done that for me in a lot of different games where you're able to kind of just switch board states pretty much, where you're the one big threat and everyone else isn't. I like a lot of one-sided board wipes like this that kind of give you a little extra leg up and doesn't just reset the game, because I've played so many games, and usually the longer games that I've played that are 2-3 hours long are the ones that 4 or 5 board wipes resolve, and you keep having to rebuild your board. So stuff like this where you can get one-sided with it just speeds up the game, but still provides all of the same stuff that a normal board wipe would. Noxious Survival, this is another card I've tried to put in a lot more of my green decks. It's just, you know, generically really good. It's 1/5 Rexium mana, so you can pay that with 2 life or a green, so this can be free. It just says put target card from a graveyard on top of its owner's library. So this does have a lot of effects, and it's used in competitive a lot because it can mess up opponents as well. Let's say someone has Reanimate and is targeting something in your graveyard, or they're targeting something in their own graveyard or somewhere. In response to their target, you can Noxious Survival whatever they're targeting back to the top of their library to fizzle the spell. So that can be kind of nice. You can kind of graveyard hate that way. But most of the time it's like, okay, before my turn, I'm going to, you know, return a card I want from my graveyard on top of my library, so I draw it for the turn. That's usually where it's end up being the best. And of course, you know, you can pay 2 life, it triggers your commander. Very good with that. Random Excavator, just play lines from our graveyard. You know, having a good amount of these effects. Like, honestly, this deck could use more of them. It's just, I was at the point with the deck where it took me forever to find cuts here and there because I wanted a lot of the cards, and like I like a lot of the synergy. You kind of have to bounce synergy pieces, because if you have a whole bunch of these cards that say plans from the graveyard, but you don't have lands to play, you know, they're kind of just dead a lot of the times. And of course, having multiple play land from graveyards cards, on top of each other doesn't give you any extra effect, so you kind of got to be careful with the way you balance that as well. We've talked about Reanimate a whole bunch. You just pay life equal to the mana cost of the creature plus 1 black from any graveyard and put it onto your battlefield. 6 is really cool, one of the newer ones from Modern Horizons 3. When it attacks, you mill cards and you put land from among them onto the battlefield or into your hand. But the big thing here, and the big reason for the being in this deck, it says as long as it's your turn, non-land permanent cards in your graveyard have retrace. So retrace is the ability that says you may cast this card by discarding a land in addition to its other costs. So that's super huge. I really like 6 in these type of decks. It just allows you to cast pretty much everything, gives you access to your whole graveyard all the time, just by discarding lands, which we're going to have a lot of lands, especially if you got something like a Life from the Loam around, where you can, you know, discard cards and, you know, return lands back to your hand to be able to discard them again. You kind of have to play around the 6 effect of like, okay, I need 1 or 2 specific permanent cards in my hand, or I want to be able to play them. So you leave lands up in your hand, even if you could play them, to be able to discard for 6's ability. But that it can come in so handy, and it has a lot of times. There's even a few lines in this deck that specifically want to get 6 out so you can reanimate other things, like if you have a Buried Alive, which we'll talk about a little bit later, where you can put cards from your library onto into your graveyard. You reanimate stuff. We have Shifting Woodland, which is a land that allows us to copy cards in our graveyard to be able to cast them again. There's a lot of things that this deck really wants with this card, and there's, you know, we're very much permanent focused with all of our lands and all of our creature cards, so it's really nice to have, and usually does a lot for the deck. And Scarab Gob is one that I didn't really understand at first to add to this deck. I was like, oh, it's kind of cool, but I didn't realize that we are a zombie deck in a way. We are going to be making a lot of zombies with all these triggers that we have. And the Scarab God, normally I think of it as just a sort of graveyard hate, a recursion card, but it does have an upkeep trigger where it says at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses X life and you scry X, where X is the number of zombies you control. So that by itself is awesome. You know, that can be a win con, or just, you know, a large debuff to your opponents. If you got, you know, 10, 15 zombies from all of the triggers that you get, getting that off is crazy. You know, that's, you know, 30 to 45 life that you're draining, and you get to scry a whole bunch at your upkeep, so you can kind of stack the top of your deck in the way that you want. The big thing with him, though, is you can pay for to exile a target creature card from a graveyard and create a 4/4 zombie token copy of it. So that's the cool thing. Not only can we do that to our opponents, so if they've got something crazy in their graveyards that we want, we can go ahead and grab that from them. Again, you can kind of use it as a graveyard hate effect, where if someone's trying to reanimate something, you can reanimate on top of it. And we can get our own stuff, of course. That's kind of the biggest thing here. Is, you know, it works really well for our deck, but it's also exiling that card. The card just stays in exile, so it's, you know, can't just keep recurring it. But because you're getting rid of it from the graveyard, we still get a commander trigger off of that as well to make more zombies. So that's really cool. We also talked about Victimize, where you can sack a creature and return 2 creatures from your graveyard to the battlefield. A really awesome effect. They come in tapped, but most of the time that doesn't end up mattering, especially for this deck, because we are a deck that, you know, at some point wants to attack with a lot of our creatures. You know, that's sort of our win con. But the creatures that we're bringing back are usually stuff, you know, we're attacking with tokens, and the ones that we're bringing back are, you know, stuff like an Aftermath Analyst or Eternal Witness that don't really care about being tapped or untapped, so it's just kind of an upside with that. Then we do have some interaction, so some of the other cards can help with interaction. Like I've talked about some graveyard hate stuff, but these are strictly for interaction. I didn't add a whole lot of counterspell stuff in here. I'm just not a huge counter guy. I would rather have removal a lot of the time, just because you never know. And I just like having the ability to see what's on the board and be able to get rid of stuff when I need it. Trying to think 4 or 5 steps ahead with whatever you're countering to see whether it's, the best strat that you could have chosen. It can be kind of difficult. It's always good to have them around. An Arcane Denial is nice because it draws you cards, or draws you a card, gives them some cards. And I do like the other side of Arcane Denial, where it's the fact that you sort of smooth over the blow of whatever you counter because you're giving them 2 cards in return. And, sometimes that kind of lightens the hate that you can get. Kind of like that, but we do have a lot of destruction effects. So Assassin's Trophy, of course, is just kind of the best one. Just destroys an opponent controls, and they can tutor for a basic land. Beast Within, destroy a permanent, give them a 3/3. Go for the Throat, destroy non-artifact creature, which is most creatures. I mean, I've seen more and more artifact creatures sort of pop up over time, but this still hits, a majority of creatures. Heroic Intervention, again, just another kind of staple to add into the deck. If you're running a green deck, you kind of need to chill out for the Heroic Intervention. It's so huge for the deck and does so much. A lot of times, especially if someone's playing like a Blasphemous Act or like a Destroy Wrath of God type of effect, or even just to give yourself hexproof, Curse of the Swine, this is amazing for, which I do see in a lot of decks. But there's a lot of times where even if you want to attack or you want to be able to block and be able to save your blockers, giving yourself indestructible can always be extremely nice to have. It's just super versatile for the amount of mana that it costs. Nature's Claim, it's just the best rate you can get for an artifact or enchantment destruction. Obscuring Haze, I try to run this in pretty much all of my decks. I don't think enough people run Fogs anymore. I think they're sort of starting to pick up on it. I've seen a few more Fogs here and there, but it's just such a good thing. This card from the cycle that it's from is I still think really, really good. $3 for a free Fog with your commander out is very nice. Sylvan Safekeeper. So Sylvan Safekeeper is sort of an interesting one. It says sacrifice a land to give target creature Shroud till end of turn. So this is nice because it's sort of a repellent, sort of a sort of counter spell to removal, where you can just be like, okay, you're going to try to go for the throat one of my creatures or Beast Within one of my creatures. I'm just going to sack a land, give it Shroud, and then can no longer be targeted. The spell fizzles. But the other side of this, not only is it nice that it's 1 min and you can get it down very easily, and it's recurable and easy to repeat by just sacrificing lands. The fact that you're sacking lands can also be really nice, because if you have the ability to play from graveyard and extra land drops and that sort of thing, even if you don't have to protect your creatures from anything, just being able to have that sacrifice allows you to play lands from the graveyard and get a bunch of extra triggers that way, which is why we like fetch lands in this deck. I didn't run a whole bunch of fetch lands in the deck because it drives the price up like crazy, and we're already at close to $600 with what we're at now. But that is definitely, if I would recommend an upgrade for this deck, it would be throw in all the off-colored fetch lands. Just put in as many as you can cram in, because they're so valuable for this deck, and they do so much for what we're working with. But yeah, Sylvan Safekeeper gives us sort of versatility there. Speaking of lands, we got 40 in here. I know that can be kind of low. I would almost want more for a landfall deck, but the cutting gets so hard at this point, and I think we have a lot of our major ones in here. So we are running all of our colored fetch lands, all 3 of them. That are in Sultai. Same thing with all of our surveillance for this deck. Not only is it nice because we were running fetches, and we're being with this deck specifically, we're able to repeat fetches a lot of times, so you want to have stuff that's fetchable. We don't have a whole lot of basics in the deck for a very specific reason. Well, surveillance, not only are they fetchable, the surveil trigger can be nice because we can put more stuff into our graveyard. We've got Prismatic Vista, our normal fetch lands. I really do like these Modern Horizons ones that just came out, where they just enter untapped as a colorless source. You can cycle them. I don't really end up doing that most of the time. And then at any point in the future, if you don't need the mana, you can sacrifice to go tutor for a basic. So it's just kind of an Evolving Wilds that has a little bit of extra value on top of it, which can be super nice. Speaking of, we are running Evolving Wilds and also Terramorphic Expanse. I try to run all of the cheap fetches in here just because it's so worth it, regardless of if they come in untapped or not, even like Fabled Passage as well, because we really much care about it. But the reason why we have so few basics in here is mostly because of Field of the Dead. I really like Field of the Dead. It's an amazing landfall card, and it very much goes along with the sort of motif of our deck, When it enters tap, it adds a colorless, and then when it or another land enters, if you control 7 or more lands with different names, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So that's kind of the big thing here, and that's why we're running snow lands, is because snow lands technically have a different name than their regular basic land counterparts. So that does count, even though they're technically the same land, they serve the same function for the most part. It counts as a different land for Field of the Dead. So that's why we're kind of running not a whole lot of basics, but a lot of stuff that has basic land types like our shocks and that sort of thing. Even though in Tango land that's in our colors, I really wish they would print the rest of the cycle. We've got that. We've got both Urborg and Yavi Maya, because they're also kind of just generically good. We've got our Triome in here, Vesuva, because, if we can get an extra Field of the Dead or something like that, that's kind of nice to get off. Or if, someone's got an insanely good land, like someone has a Nykthos or a Guy's Cradle or something out, that's just a good land to have for that. Shifting Woodland is one of my favorites in here. So it's got a Delirium ability that says pay for. And Delirium, of course, is only activatable if you have at least 4 card types in your graveyard, which, it's not too hard with this deck because we're putting so much crap in our graveyard, and we do have a good variety of stuff. But it becomes a target permanent in your graveyard until end of turn, which is sort of, like a pseudo reanimation effect if you need an Ancient Green Warden until end of turn or that sort of thing. What I end up using this a lot for is 6, or if you have 6 in the graveyard, or, you can tutor it to graveyard or whatever, and you have Shifting Woodland, you can kind of just copy 6 while it's in your graveyard to get a 1-turn effect of its ability. You don't really need it on the battlefield otherwise, or, you may just reanimate it with its own ability, which is kind of weird, but works out to keep it around if you really need to. But I like the versatility that this card gives. Same thing with Cephalid Coliseum, so this is kind of a cool one. It adds mana, damages you, but it has Threshold, so as long as you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you can activate Threshold. It says pay a blue, tap it, sacrifice it, target player draws 3 cards, and then discards 3 cards. So this is just kind of another generically, if a land that draws this card is amazing, and we can get to Threshold very easily. We are net neutral, so it's not technically card advantage with this card, but you're able to sort of sculpt your hand, and of course the cards are going to a graveyard, which is very good for what we're doing. We've got Command Tower and Exotic Orchard. I didn't really add too many lands that didn't have non-basic land types because we care so much about them. But those are just kind of too good to pass up for mana fixing. Dryad Arbor, of course, not only does it have the basic land type, it is a creature which, can matter for certain things. You can tutor it up with a lot of effects, like if you do have, a Buried Alive and you can play lands from graveyard. This is a good way to do that, to get a little bit of extra value off of that. And then, of course, Glacial Chasm, kind of talked about earlier. So Glacial Chasm is an older card. It has cumulative upkeep, pay 2 life. So each upkeep, you have to, you put an age counter on it, and then you pay the upkeep cost for each age counter on it. So it's 2, then 4, then 6, then 8. It goes up every single turn that it's out. When it enters, you sacrifice a land, and that says you can attack, and all damage dealt to you do is reduced to 0. So that's kind of the big thing here, is this is sort of just a turbo fog engine. When it enters, you can sack lands. That's super easy. And then for cumulative upkeep, if you do not pay cumulative upkeep, it just sacrifices itself. And that's pretty busted when you're playing land recursion, because you can just be like, okay, I paid 2 for life into it. You don't have to keep it around forever. Let it hit the graveyard, and then as long as you can recur it, you just do that. So you can kind of skate even the cost of that. And because you are skating the cost, let's say you keep this around because someone's about to swing out, they've got a huge board of warriors or something, they have lethal on you. You play this, you can't be attacked for that turn, and then on your turn you get rid of it, and you can kind of get rid of that downside, because as long as it's not on the battlefield, you can attack. And most of the time, the damage reduction only really matters on opponent's turns, so you can really skirt most of the downsides of this card in this deck, which is why it's a game changer, because it's very easy to exploit, like a lot of old cards are. But again, like I said, it's not something you need for the deck, but having that little bit of extra protection interaction is always nice to have. And I run that kind of stuff when I can. I'm very unapologetic for, doing the good stuff. It's good for a reason. And even this deck, you could very much put a lot more into it. Like I said, fetches, run all of your off-colored fetches, as long as they have 1 land type that you can use, totally run it in here. Really, if you have no limit, I would definitely even add in the original dual lands, because having basic land types just matters so much for what we're doing. Especially if you're increasing the land count, those matter so much, because you want to, since we're reusing our fetches a whole lot and we're getting a lot of lands out fast, we really need to be able to have those cards to 2 to 4 in our graveyard not run out very quickly. I think last one down here Yeah, is Strip Mine. So Strip Mine, I added this in here because it's very much similar to the fetches where you're able to use them over and over again. Strip Mine, you can add a mana of any color or one colorless mana, or you can sacrifice it to destroy target land. So I do think I'm kind of in the camp of a lot of people that are sort of coming around to single target land destruction in decks because people have stuff like Gaia's Cradles or, you know, Nykthoses or whatever that are just very good that can be very problematic. Even stuff like Maze of Ith, you know, I would, if I'm a Voltron deck, I'm probably running a good amount of single target land removal because there's been so many times where I'm playing a Voltron deck, someone has a Maze of Ith, and my game plan's kind of over because they just remove my creature from combat, and you know, that's that. But with this deck specifically, you can get pretty degenerate with Strip Mine because you sacrifice it, and if you have multiple land drops, you can play it again, sacrifice it to destroy stuff, and you can do that over and over again. That's not the primary purpose of it in this deck. It's just sort of an extra thing. And of course, you know, we're sacrificing and playing it. I'm getting some triggers off of our commanders, part of that. But mostly it's good as a single target land removal, and it's one of the best single target removal besides like a Field of Ruin, that sort of thing. It's just a really good rate for what it is. It's just a sack to destroy, and they don't get anything back from it. And as for mill, we don't have a lot of strict mill in this deck, just a few things that happen to mill. I had a little bit more in the deck beforehand, but you know, really trying to make sure we have just the core set that we really need for the deck. So Aftermath Analyst, the cool part with this that I didn't talk about earlier is the fact that when it enters, it mills you cards. So then, you know, a lot of times it'll put some lands in your graveyard, so when you activate it, it kind of fuels itself for its own ability, which is nice. Alter Dimension is awesome for this deck. Because you can sacrifice the tokens that you make off of Teval's ability to mill cards, and then you use those mill cards to make more zombies and kind of do sort of a get rog sort of thing. Not quite as reliable. It really depends on what you get in your graveyard, but just being able to fill up your graveyard and use our tokens more efficiently and for, you know, as a bigger resource. Colossal Graveweaver also, when it enters or attacks, mills 3 cards. So that's nice. It turns its own ability a lot of times, especially for, you know, an 8 mana card. That's nice. Grizzly Salvage doesn't technically mill cards, but when you reveal cards, whatever you don't put into your hand, with this card, you're putting at least 4, if not 5 cards from the top of your library into the graveyard. So it's pretty much just mill. And then Hedron Crab. So Hedron Crab, we aren't running Ruin Crab in the deck. You very much could, but this deck doesn't really care about milling our opponents out. That's not the way we're trying to win here. Hedron Crab is very cool specifically, and it's even in the commander deck. You can see the symbol. It's got landfall. Whenever land enters, target player mills 3 cards. So this is sort of the worst version of Ruin Crab in a lot of ways, where Ruin Crab just says each opponent mills 3 cards. But Hedron Crab is target player, doesn't say opponent. So a lot of times what we do with this is when we have lands enter, we mill ourselves. Just because that's, you know, way better for us to get the mill in, and that's what we kind of are looking for, is just to fill up our graveyard. I don't run a lot of you know, mill decks that care about opponent stuff. I like a lot of self mill. I think it's more fun to be able to put stuff into our own graveyard and play with that rather than, you know, trying to mill our opponents. I think it's just more interesting that way. Skull Prophet, it has a dork ability where you can add mana, but the other part of it is you can tap it to mill 2 cards. So this is kind of just all around a really nice card for the deck. Again, is in the precon because it's just a very good card, but yeah, you know, the extra mill can be nice if we don't have anything to do with the mana. And speaking of mana, we have quite a bit of ramp in here. Not as much as, you know, a lot of other decks would. We are a lands matter deck, but not as much as a lot of, you know, straight up landfall decks care about. So, you know, we don't have a crazy amount of land tutors. We don't even have Soul Ring Arcanes in this deck. That's how, you know, Minuscule had to get with the stuff, but they just didn't fully fit the game plan. We're really trying to go for just exactly the type of ramp that we want to go with. And the Sands Dark Ritual, it's just too good of a card. It's even better than Soul Ring. You know, netting you 2 mana on whatever turn is just too explosive not to play if you're playing in black. Crop Rotation is nice. Most of the time, this is just tutor for Field of Ruin. You could add in, there's a lot of effects where you can just kind of tutor for any land. If you really wanted to go heavy into the Field of Ruin effect, or like Dakmor Salvage, you could get Rog combo, you could add in a lot more of these. Kind of nice to just have a few things in there, like White of the Reliquary is another one that allows you to kind of get stuff from your, whatever lands you want from your library into the battlefield. Like Elvish Reclaimer is another one that a lot of people use as well. I really like White of the Reliquary though. Because it just says tap, sack a land, or sack a creature, excuse me, search your library for a land card, put on the battlefield tapped. So this is really nice because, of course, we're going to have a lot of sack fodder in the deck with all the stuff that we're making. And, you know, it is actually kind of a nice creature. It's a 2-mana 2/2 with Vigilance that says it gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. So this can kind of be a beater. It's just kind of a good card all around. It's very, of course, similar to Knight of the Reliquary, but this a lot of times can end up being way better. Just the specific effect that we're getting from it is very nice, and getting whatever land we want is kind of the biggest thing here, being able to tutor out whatever lands we need. Deathrite Shaman, so this has a lot of different abilities that we really like. It's a mana dork first and foremost most of the time, where you can tap and exile target land card from a graveyard, so it can be opponent stuff as well. Add 1 mana of any color, so that's kind of the dork ramp part of this. But of course, we are exiling cards from graveyard, so if it is our graveyard, we get more Teval triggers. You can pay a black to tap it to exile target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard. Each opponent loses 2 life, and then pay green and tap it, exile target creature card from a graveyard, you gain 2 life. So those last 2 abilities, you know, kind of just extra if you don't have anything. We have fetches and stuff, so we can fuel his first ability a lot of times. You know, sort of the modern legacy type thing. But the other 2 things are more towards just graveyard hate if we really need to, or just getting triggers off of our own stuff to make zombie druids. One of my favorite spells from Lord of the Rings, I like the set. It has a whole bunch of cool stuff in it, but I'm really glad that there's some cool commons and uncommons. I do value sets that have stuff in every, you know, rarity slot that you can kind of look through. It's not just, you know, the back or front of the pack where the rare is that matters. Endless Restoration is a 3-mana instant that's a sack a land, and the cool thing with this is it's not as an additional cost like crop rotation sack a land. So if you have this on the stack as an additional cost, you have to sack the land. So if it gets countered, you're just out of land. With Endless Restoration, it's a part of the resolution of the effect to sacrifice the land. So if it gets countered, you're not out of land. It has to resolve for you to actually have to pay that cost. It's a second land. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put on the battlefield, tapped, and then shuffle. The big thing here is if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, instead search for 3 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield, tapped, and then shuffle. So it's kind of one of the better effects for this. One if you in the game that gets you more than 1 land on your battlefield tapped, which is really nice. 3 is insane, and of course our commander is exactly a 4 power creature, so most of the time we're getting this trigger to resolve. And then there's other stuff in the deck that is also going to be powerful enough to trigger this, but having it in the command zone is definitely the big thing here. Just a really good card for what it's worth. Of course, sacking lands to be able to reanimate is another part of it. Exploration, again, kind of just if you're running landfall, this is a good one to have. 1 green to get an extra land drop during your turns. Farseek searches for anything that's not a forest onto the battlefield. Though specifically with this card, it just says each other land type. It doesn't exclude forests, it just doesn't include forests. So you could look for, you know, a watery grave or a breeding pool, something that shares a forest type, but that is not specifically a forest. You could even grab the tram or whatever. And they're not basics either, so you can grab a lot of different stuff. You could go grab, you know, anything like original duels, what have you, something that just has the land type, which is kind of nice. Harrow is sort of the other version of Endless Restoration, where you sack land to go get. This is an additional cost to sack it, but the big thing with this is it's 2 basic land cards onto the battlefield untapped. So this a lot of times can allow you to double spell, which is really nice. Kind of give you that extra ability there. Being able to double spell on a turn, especially early turns, it's such a big deal, which is why, you know, I love cards like this. Lotus Cobra is one of our other few handful specific triggers where just land enters, you add 1 mana of any color. Very good when we have these sort of things. You know, this is great when you get down on like turn 2 and you're able to hold up, you know, a lot of your land tutor effects, because you can tutor out lands with stuff, you know, like 3 visits in Nature's Lore, where it tutors a land, you get the land off the landfall ability of Lotus Cobra, and then it also enters untapped because it's, you know, just a forest card to the battlefield. So you can really get a lot of extra mana. It's a lot of good explosive ramp with that. And of course, these both say just search your library for a forest on the battlefield, so it's very much kind of the opposite of Farseek, where you just kind of get whatever you want. It doesn't have to be a basic one, but these don't specify taps, so that's kind of the other big part of it. Skyshard Claim is literally just 2 of these at once. It's like playing Nature's Lore and 3 visits at the same time. It's 4 mana, and you search for 2 forests on the battlefield. That's good there. We talked about Skull Prophet. It's a mana dork in itself, which can be really nice. And the last one here is Spelunking. So this is sort of an effect I put in a lot of these decks as well. It draws you a card when it enters, and then it lets you put a land from your hand on the battlefield after that. If you put a cave down, you gain 4 life. That doesn't really matter almost ever. It's just a cool effect to be able to, you know, ramp one out, draw an extra card. That by itself is nice, but the big thing is it's final text that says lands you control enter the battlefield untapped. So for all these effects that have lands enter, you know, that makes Endless Restoration kind of insane. It pays for itself, gets you a bunch of landfall triggers off of that, and when they enter untapped, it's pretty huge. There's a lot of other effects, like if you're playing, it's not in here right now, but if you're, you know, run Escape Shift or a Splendor Reclamation or anything that, you know, mass reanimates lands or lets you put lands from graveyard, or even like stuff like Terramorphic Expanse or Evolving Wilds just become Prismatic Vistas, which is really nice for that kind of stuff. Or shock lands or surveil lands. Like surveil lands are absolutely insane because they just enter untapped by themselves and give you a surveil trigger. You don't have to pay for shock lands. Amulet of Vigor is the other one a lot of people use for this, but Slunking kind of just the cheap one that gives you a little bit of extra value on top of it. I really like this running in this card. Not even just landfall specific stuff, but just anything that has a lot of tapped lands, or like even budget decks. Like this is something I'd run in any of my budget decks that runs bounce lands or that sort of thing, because it just gives you so much extra value and allows you to kind of work within that mana base a lot easier. Not to say we have a budget mana base in any way. We know we're running shocks and fetches and that sort of thing, but it is nice to get that even more value out of the stuff that you're playing. Speaking of value, we got our final category here, kind of just the specific weird stuff that doesn't fall into other categories, like Wonder. So there are a cycle of 5 incarnation cards that, as long as you're in the graveyard and you control one of the 5 basic land types, they grant the creatures whatever, some sort of keyword. So the one everyone runs is Anger, where as long as you control a mountain, it's in your graveyard, it gives your creatures haste, which is pretty big. Wonder's really cool. You could run all 3, Filth and Vigor, in here. I didn't because it's just, the other ones aren't super necessary. Filth gives Swamp Walk and Vigor gives Trample. Wonder is awesome because it's kind of better than both of them most of the time with the flying. And we're going to be controlling an island most of the time. That's, something we've really kind of tried to stay with the deck, is having a lot of basic land types and being able to hit a lot of these triggers. So you just basically want to mill this card or get into your graveyard some way. Usually it's through milling. To be able to get that ability, and then give all of your druids flying most of the time. Just have a giant flying board. Talked about Buried Alive quite a few times in the deck. It's just a 3-mana sorcery that you can search your library for up to 3 creature cards, put them to your graveyard, and then shuffle. That's really awesome for when we have a reanimation soul that we want to use, but nothing to reanimate. Or, like I said, specific stuff like with 6, where we have a Shifting Woodlands or something that we can copy spells. Or even with the Rotting Hulk Dragon, where we're able to, it cares about creatures being put into graveyards. With this trigger, it immediately will put one of those creatures back onto the battlefield. Same thing with Entomb. Entomb is just put any card from your library into your graveyard. So if you want something even more specific, like let's say you want to set up the Gitrog combo, this is really good for. Put Dakmorg Salvin into your graveyard and kind of start that up. But really anything, this is the good versatile spell. A lot of times this is better than, a Vampiric Tutor, or even just like the generic tutors. It's instant speed, 1 mana. It gets it right where we want it in the graveyard. But this is awesome with the giant dragon, because it immediately, instant speed can give you an Ancient Greed Warden or like a Crater Hoof Behemoth. So Crater Hoof, the thing with this deck is we want to be able to close out games, and I'm really glad this got printed in Standard, because it allows us to put it in a lot more decks and kind of keep the budget slightly lower. It's still a $16 card, but that's better than the $35-$40 that it was going for beforehand. I think you even got it to like $60 not too long ago. It's good to have these recent reprints. When it enters, if you don't know, it has haste. When it enters, creatures you control gain trample and +X till end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. So if you've got even like 8 creatures when this enters, you're giving everything you control +8. This becomes a 13/13 with haste and trample. And this just says, hey, I'm going to end the game. The cool thing with this, though, is it's just an ETB trigger. So if you have some sort of reanimation effect that you want to play, like if you're going to entomb, like I said earlier, the Crater of Behemoth, you very much could easily kind of just, the thing that allows us to close out the game, this deck makes a lot of tokens, but there's only so many ways that you can buff them. Having, specifically a combo per se of just, hey, I'm going to get this creature out, I'm going to make my board insurmountably large, I'm going to go in for the attack. Just a way for us to sort of close stuff out. Psychic Frog we kind of talked about before, but it is a really good effect and something you could add way more of in here. It's an amazing card by itself. It does so much stuff, for a 2-mana 1/2. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player or a planeswalker, you draw a card, you discard a card, which was the big one for our combos, where you put a +1/+1 counter on it when you do so. And the biggest thing here is the ability to repeatedly exile stuff from your graveyard for free. It just says exile 3 cards from your graveyard, Psychic Frog gains flying till end of turn. So this is a good way if you've got a giant graveyard, but you don't have, delve cards or ways to get rid of cards from your graveyard very easily. You just need a board state. You can kind of just over and over again trigger that, just give it flying over and over again. And for each instance of 3 cards, you're getting, of course, a druids and that sort of thing. And there are a lot of other effects that I kind of had to cut that care about cards leaving the graveyard. That's another thing you could very much go into more, is like exile effects or just reanimation effects within the deck. But a lot of times our commander is enough. For the most part, there are other things that you can add, like Turok is really nice, being able to create tap zombies, but most of the time we're getting what we need to. Teval's Judgment is a really cool card from the precon as well. It just says whenever one more cards leave your graveyard, choose one that has been chosen this turn. So you draw a card, create a treasure token, or create a 2/2 black zombie druid creature token. So kind of just best of all worlds, or whatever you need. If you need a little bit extra mana during the turn, create that treasure token. And then usually I would say it's kind of in ascending order. It's usually, hey, I'm going to draw a card because that's the most important, is the card advantage. Then create the treasure token. Then at the end, create your zombie token. And usually most of the time, I feel like you're triggering this one or two times a turn, even if it's just once per turn. Every single turn being able to draw an extra card off of whatever you're already doing can be nice, or just the treasure token, whatever. Really, really cool card from the precon. And last but not least, we've got Uro. So Uro, again, is kind of just generically good. When it enters, sacrifice it unless it escaped. And says whenever it enters or attacks, you gain 3 life, draw a card, then you put a land from your hand on the battlefield. So that's kind of crazy. It's a 3-mana 6/6. Of course, it has kind of a weird clause where you have to escape it for it to stay on the battlefield. But the ETB and attack trigger is awesome. We care about all 3 of those things. Gaining life can be kind of nice, but the draw a card and put a land down is kind of the biggest piece of this, sort of like a splunking trigger. I'll get that card advantage, being able to ramp a little bit. And the escape is also great for a deck as well. So its escape cost says pay 2 green and 2 blue, exile 5 other cards from your graveyard. So once you do that, as long as it's in your graveyard, this is another thing, sort of like a flashback cost, where even if you end up milling Uro into your graveyard off of whatever triggers, this is a very easy way to get it back onto your battlefield. You get his trigger, you get to exile cards from your graveyard, so that also triggers our commander. And then at that point, it's just a 6-mana or a 6/6 that its attack trigger gives a bunch of life and allows us to draw a bunch of cards. It's just a really awesome card all around. It's seen them play in a lot of different formats because of how good it is. These giants were awesome from Theros. They do a bunch of really cool stuff, but this all around, pretty much everything it does is super beneficial for the deck, which is why I threw it in here. But yeah, that is the deck. So very much a lot of different avenues you can take this commander, which I really much enjoy, because I feel like so many commanders anymore, it's like, oh, this is sort of a worse version of this, or this is sort of a more awkward version of this. But I feel like this commander by itself does stuff differently. I know it kind of said it was similar to the Necrobloom, but I feel like the game plan with this is different enough that I think it's fun, especially with the different colors that you're in and the way that you can shift it in so many different ways. I think this deck, you could run 2 different Teval decks and they could be completely different if built correctly. I think that's really fun. Have one that's way more focused on Zombie Tribal, I think, is a really awesome way to do this, or that's focused on specifically exiling cards from graveyard, or you could very much heavily pivot. I do like having the sort of different effects going on. I just think lands and graveyard recursion are 2 really cool archetypes, so kind of mashing them together and getting a value out of all of it, especially because lands are very easy to get out of the graveyard, is really fun, and it's not too hard to do. And I definitely milling this deck, I've played my Necrobloom deck a whole lot, and so this is very much a tried and true method, and it's cool to get the sort of switch up of colors as well, to see the deck in sort of a new light with the advantages that something that green and blue can have, as opposed to green, white, black. But yeah, that about wraps it up. A really cool commander. I'm very much liking Tarkir Dragonstorm. It's been one of my favorite sets of late. Gonna probably build a whole bunch more commander decks based around a lot of the commanders in here because I think they're really fun. If you want to check out my playlist to all the commander decks I have done, make sure to look at the description below. I will also leave a link to the Moxfield deck list, where you can go check this out in its entirety down there as well. Besides all of that, I will see all of you in the next one.